Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of DMV Confidential. I'm Kenzie Chase.
And I'm Jenny Gable.
And today we have a new episode for you to talk about. So the story we want to talk to you about, we want to bring you back to 1972 when investigators found the body of a young child. And for a long time, the identity of this child remained unknown until more data was able to be collected from this child to kind of connect him back to where he came from and what possibly happened. So the story we want to talk to you guys about today is the death of a 4-year-old John Doe.
Yeah, Kenzie, so it was June 13th, 1972, as you said, when this child, this 4-year-old child who was unidentified at the time, was found, I believe in Lorton, in Macy Creek under the old Colchester Bridge. And investigators initially didn't know who this child was. They, weren't able to identify him. So actually at the time, a local church in the area gave him the name Charles Lee Charlotte, and actually helped assist in his burial to give him like a proper ceremony at Coleman Cemetery in Alexandria. But yeah.
And I just want to talk about that first because the 4-year-old's part even was not known at the time. All they really knew is that this was a very young child that was found by that bridge that I had shown in that visual right here. This is the bridge that they sort of found the child by. This is by courtesy of Fairfax County Police. But I just think it's kind of crazy that because they didn't know who this child was, the community kind of came together and kind of gave this child a name.
Yeah, I think that was a really, obviously in a very dark and grim situation. I can't even imagine the police or responders that found this young child's remains in this area. It's that's a horrible thing to come across.
And how many questions that they had.
Yeah, and for something like this to happen, an autopsy actually revealed that the child had blunt force trauma to their head. So they were able to say, even though they didn't know who this was, that it was a homicide.
Yeah, and so the case actually went cold for about 50 years. And try as they might, they weren't able to really make a lot of progress with this. In fact, in 2003, so this happened on June 13th, 1972, but in 2003, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children created a computer-generated sketch. And that's what you see here. This is the computer-generated sketch of the child, kind of hoping to see if they could get more leads.
Yeah, maybe to see if people in the community or potential family members could be able to say, I recognize this child, I know who this was, this missing person. Because again, this is decades later, and I think it really goes back to the lack of technology and things that were available back then.
And even this, I would say, is pretty advanced. Yeah. Obviously, we know now that we have things like AI that can create images and probably help with more of sketches, for police work. But at the time, this is what they had, and so they kind of created this computer-generated sketch, which I think is pretty advanced.
Yeah, definitely for 2003, I didn't know that they were, could really make an image that looked realistic like that from a case that happened decades before.
Yeah, well, and I also think it's interesting. I don't know in what state that the body was found, but I'm assuming if they're making a sketch, they didn't really want to, either they took it directly from photos of the child, or the child was in a state of decay and they couldn't really piece that together. I'm sure they didn't want to post pictures of the body. So I don't know if this was them sketching out from the photos that were clear, or if this was their putting together what was in front of them from a decaying body, if that made sense.
Yeah, but it is definitely striking that, again, 1972, all these years later, 2003, they're able to release this kind of generated image.
Yeah,
of what
and I actually think it's pretty good.
Looked like. Yeah,
it's a pretty good. You can see a lot of features on this child. But yeah, so it did. In doing so, they were able to get several tips, but I don't really think that it went anywhere. It just kind of stayed up in the air as far as what actually happened. And they were able to sort of reevaluate some of the evidence that they collected. In fact, a hair evidence was found in 2004 and sent to the FBI, where they try to get some mitochondria DNA from that, and they were actually able to extract that successfully. So they entered it into the database, a national database, but again, it failed to yield any real results.
Yeah, and I believe they said that they got 2 potential leads of missing children, but they were actually ruled out with that DNA.
Yeah. There was a child, Solomon Rose, and a child, George Barksdale, that were missing children that they thought could potentially be this child. But based on the DNA, they were able to rule those out. So now they're kind of back at square one. I mean, not fully at square one, right? At least they found DNA evidence, like hair evidence, which is impressive in of itself. But they ruled out the other children that had been reported missing. And so they're kind of like reevaluating what they know about this situation.
Yeah, and I know that detectives had mentioned that they tried to get authorization to kind of exhume or like remove the child's body from where it had been buried, but there was poor cemetery records and also a storm that had kind of gone through the area that made that difficult because it kind of erased the burial markers of where the John Doe had been buried in the first place.
Right. So when the more advanced technology came, and actually I had spoken to a CSI agent on a different case, and she was talking about how like in that kind of time period in general, and so I'm assuming it kind of carries over to this because it's around the same time frame as that case that we'll cover in a different episode. But she talked about how like at that time they didn't really know how to preserve DNA evidence because they didn't even know that that was something that could be tested down the road. So like sometimes the way that things were preserved weren't always in the best state because again, they didn't know that you could test for DNA. It just wasn't a thing. So I wonder if that's what happened here. Like they didn't really keep good track of the remains and like burial markers because they didn't ever think that they were going to need the body again for anything.
Yeah, it's like trying to like hindsight 2020 obviously again.
Yeah.
Like, nobody could really guess how far technology. I mean, if you like I even think back to this is kind of on a different topic, but like you mentioned with AI, like years ago if you told people that AI would be as advanced as it is now, so they probably didn't even think to realize how to kind of keep track of that in the moment.
And so I wonder if that's sort of what happened. Like they just didn't even know that this could be a possibility to solve this in the future. And so they kind of got a little, not careless, but just didn't do their due diligence as far as like trying to market properly. But again, there was also storms and things that just kind of like moved that out of, like moved stuff out around to kind of make it difficult for investigators.
Yeah, but Astria Forensics actually, who they are known for their ability to extract hair DNA without the root from the hair, they were actually able to extract a profile from just a few millimeters of hair.
Which is way less than normal, what's normally required.
Where they would normally require, I believe, a couple centimeters of hair. So they were able to use a way less amount than usual to kind of extract information from this. And from that, they were able to develop a DNA profile, basically, to try to identify possible relatives of this John Doe. So it kind of goes back to, in a lot of cases where we see in this way, where they try to kind of build out that family tree or see relatives that are connected through the DNA.
Right. And Jenny, I want to talk a little bit about Astria Forensics because I think this is kind of crazy in of itself, too, is the fact that they usually require, like you mentioned, more DNA sample, like a few centimeters, and they didn't have that. So
a few millimeters is what?
Yeah, a few millimeters.
Right?
So like way less, and they were able to extract the DNA from that is impressive and just kind of goes to show like the fact that this was so advanced, especially for the time. I mean, we hear in more recent cases people going and retesting and doing familiar DNA, building out family trees, all that stuff. And we'll actually get into a little bit more in this case as well. But kind of just at that time, in that time period, to be able to extract DNA with just a few millimeters, way less than normal. I mean,
and this hair that had been, saved from this case that happened in the 70s, like years prior. It really is a crazy thing. And you wonder how these investigators are able to kind of use technology to do that.
Right.
Really.
And right when they were probably thinking like, oh, hope is lost because like we don't even have enough DNA evidence to test, and then they come back and say, no, we were actually able to extract some evidence. So I think that's like super impressive, and I just kind of want to give kudos to that, just the
Yeah.
fact that we were able to accomplish that.
That's a pretty big deal.
Yeah. And then when they were able to create this DNA, extract this DNA, they were able to kind of confirm sort of the identity of potentially who could be the mother.
Yeah, and that kind of led them to this woman named Vera Bryant, actually. And she was known to have a 4-year-old son who actually went missing after they had left, I believe, Philadelphia for Virginia in the year 1972. So from this, that they kind of trace it to this name, and they're able to see that this woman had this son that went missing. And from there, they're able to kind of go to Philadelphia, actually, to try to connect with family members of her to learn more about, could this be the potential mother of this child? And,
Right,
what,
so they connected with like a relative who was kind of able to give them more information about the John Doe's potential mother, Vera Bryant. And it was kind of mentioned that Vera Bryant had like you said, Jenny, had a 4-year-old son who went missing. And that 4-year-old son was named Carl Matthew Bryant. And again, went missing shortly after they left for Virginia in 1972.
Yeah, and as a matter of fact, Vera Bryant actually had 2 sons, Carl Matthew Bryant and a son named James as well. And, so they're kind of connecting the dots here. But due to, like we talked about earlier, preservation efforts maybe at the time not being, as adequate as they are today, efforts to try to find Vera Bryant's remains were proving difficult so that they could kind of see if there was a match there.
So Jenny, I actually think it wasn't a preservation issue of finding the body. I think it was more of an issue of actually being able to test the DNA from Vera Bryant because of preservation issues.
Yeah, like they had trouble tracking where, getting her remains and things like that to test because of all these years had passed.
So, but they were able to get some of her remains.
They were eventually.
It was just an issue. It was an issue of like trying to match them together, and so they had to like keep trying. So after multiple attempts, the test coming back inconclusive, they weren't able to fully narrow it down. It finally kind of came back and confirmed as a match again from Astrea Forensics.
Yeah,
were able to confirm that they are a match and that this is her son.
And they also actually did take DNA from Carl's suspected father as well, and they looked through birth certificates, historical records, and things like that. So again, they were able to kind of exhume her body after speaking with family members, able to kind of locate where that was, and kind of confirm that maternal link. And on July 1st, actually, they were able to confirm that the John Doe was that of 4-year-old Carl Bryant.
Right. And I think we kind of got a little ahead of ourselves because we forgot to mention, we're talking about her body. So obviously, Vera Bryant, the mother of this 4-year-old child, was no longer alive. She actually died back in 1980.
Yeah.
And like you mentioned, Jenny, the family member said that she had 2 sons. She had Carl Matthew Bryant, and she also had her son, James. So, I kind of want to just talk about this information in general. So, the mother was missing her son, 4-year-old Carl Bryant, back in 1972. Then she dies in 1980, so not that long after, really.
Just a few years after, but it was also confirmed, I believe at some point, I don't remember specifically the year, that James had also gone missing as well.
Right. And as far as we're aware, we don't know anything about James disappearing.
Yep.
So that's a whole different thing. Yeah. But we have Carl Bryant who went missing. And again, the community has kind of like rallied against this with this child. Like, came up with the name.
It's a horrible, tragic thing. Initially hearing about this case, you would even think like because they know, again, might not know who has done this at this point, but that it was a homicide. So for somebody to kill a child in this way and then for them to be found like this is just a really tragic thing, and you wonder how that impacted that community.
Yeah, and I also just think about the fact that like the mother wasn't alive to see this come to fruition.
Yeah.
Like the mother wasn't alive to like really be I don't even know, like, was she even questioned back when the child originally went missing?
Yeah.
All we know is that, like,
there's a lot of unclear details there.
A lot of unclear details that could be due to just not reports not being filed, due to just lack of documentation at the time. But I kind of wonder what would happen, like, if she had been alive around the time that police found this out. Like, what would her reaction have been to know that police found her child at the bridge, and all these years they've been working on it, and they finally confirmed a match to her?
Yeah, it is.
And what happened to James?
Yeah, because that's actually, I believe police said they never found James's body. So that's like, again, like that's a whole different situation that is a lot of questions up in the air on what could have happened to him.
And it's also suspicious that Miss Vera Bryant, like, had 2 children missing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that kind of, I guess, leads us a little bit to more on what investigators are able to learn about this case, and that's that, you know, again, it's Carl Bryant, and they kind of can see that he was born in 1968. I believe they said May 26. But from information that detectives are able to kind of gather about this case, they kind of determine, according to police, that Vera Bryant, the mother, and her boyfriend, who's named James Hedgepeth at the time, they're both now dead, as we said earlier, Kenzie, but they believe that they were both involved in 4-year-old Carl Bryant's murder.
Which,
yeah,
just take a second, because that's her son.
Yeah.
And we know that he was found with blunt force trauma to the head, and found, like, underneath a bridge in, I believe it's Lorton. Yeah, underneath a bridge in Lorton, like, abandoned.
I feel like with, you know, we cover a lot of cases like this on here, but also just working in news, you hear a lot of really sad and horrible things like this. It always leaves you wondering how anybody could ever do something like this, how something like this could happen. But I feel like every time it doesn't fail to still have that, I'm still left, like, speechless about it, because it's just horrible.
Yeah. And again, she died in 1980, so, like, by the time police were to confirm this match, they can't even question her. Like,
can't question her about Carl or, you know, James.
Yeah.
And
we don't know what happened to James.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's 2 children from the same mother. I don't believe the boyfriend, based on the fact that they took DNA from what they suspected was Carl's father, I'm guessing that they don't believe that the boyfriend, James Hedgepeth, was the father. Seems like they think someone else was the father. And I don't know about James Bryant. They didn't really mention much about James Bryant, whether they think that James Bryant was a child from both of them. But he does have the same name as the boyfriend, so that...
And they did just say that James, although they didn't find him, not sure exactly what happened to him, that he's also presumed dead.
Yeah, and they believe that they believe James Bryant was killed around the same time and possibly dumped somewhere between Philadelphia and Middlesex County. Did I say that right? Middlesex?
Yes, I believe so. Yes.
Somewhere between that route.
And I think also that's important to mention in this case is that the boyfriend, James Hedgepeth, was also previously convicted of, I believe investigators said, murder, and he had a violent criminal history as well. So they kind of discover this link between Vera Bryant and that she was dating this person, and not only did they find her son like this, but the boyfriend that she was with at the time had this violent criminal past as well.
And this is challenging because obviously this is what investigators believe.
Yes.
They believe Vera Bryant and James killed, murdered the 2 children and dumped their bodies. James Bryant somewhere along that route we mentioned, and then Carl Bryant obviously under this bridge. But again, we aren't able to ever question them, so it's like the question of, what, did that really happen? Theoretically, something else could have happened, but...
Because they weren't able to be questioned, you know, have a trial, like you're saying, Kenzie, you know, and they always say, like, innocent until proven guilty, but they're not around to kind of have that conversation.
And I wonder what the family is thinking, because she lost 2 children. 2 children went missing. So, I mean, one, you know, they could have been thinking was something happened with that, like maybe they got abducted, whatever family members are thinking. But to have 2 children missing. I'm curious how they even, like, how Vera Bryant even explained that, like, even began to explain that to her family.
Yeah, and another thing that I find interesting as well, and correct me if I'm wrong, Kenzie, but I don't believe investigators ever specified how Vera Bryant, I mean, they said that she died in 1980, which is not less than 10 years after this took place, but I don't believe they specified how she died or anything else about her death, except for the fact that they were able to collect this DNA from her.
Yeah,
so that was always interesting to me.
Yeah, so we don't even know, like, how she died, like, by what manner or whatever. But I do think I think investigators are pretty confident just based on the fact that her boyfriend had a violent criminal history, one that included murder. So I don't really think they thought he was above this, and this just wasn't something that happened. But it is just so sad to think about the fact that 2 children killed around the same time and then just believed to be dumped somewhere. Like, one of the bodies isn't even found yet.
Yeah, it is really just, it's horrible. And it's kind of going back to what you said earlier. Like, I feel like automatically I think about the family that was, like, impacted by this, and, like, how I can't even imagine how they were feeling. Like, I know that, like, I myself have young nieces and nephews who are around this age, and, like, it's just a horrible thing to even think about.
I think the biggest question is why.
Yeah. Just a lot of unanswered questions, for sure. Yeah.
I mean, my biggest question is definitely why. Did you just get annoyed and snap? Did they say something? Like, it had to have been some sort of snap. Like, was it premeditated?
Planned, right? Yes. Yeah.
Was it? I mean, they traveled from Philadelphia to Virginia around this time that they went missing. So, like, did you take that trip?
Which I don't think they specified that either. Like, why they necessarily may have traveled.
Yeah. Did you take that trip with the intention of doing this? Did you take this trip after doing this? Did you take this trip, like, and then this just happened along the way? Like, I have so many questions and so little answers as far as how such a tragedy could have happened. And I think investigators are probably frustrated too that she died before they were able to question her and ask what happened.
Yeah, I'm sure after putting, all that work into this case, and of course it's never in vain, but you're hoping, the outcome I'm sure that investigators hope for is that they're able to at least kind of get more answers as to the why and, like, question people that they believe are responsible. But in cases like this, like we've seen before in some of our past episodes where the people who are suspects have passed away, then that makes it pretty impossible, definitely impossible there.
Yeah, unless they had left like a note or something, which is not the case here.
Yeah.
But one detective who was on this case, Detective Melissa Wallace, was kind of able to give, I don't know, like
her
thoughts, and she at least felt happy the fact that they were able to identify the child, even if they weren't able to bring anyone to justice.
Extent of that boy's injuries and what he had suffered through, I'm happy to be here today announcing that at least we've identified him. Extent of that.
Yeah, and I know that she also said kind of in that conference that, she has her own son. She was like, I believe, most of us are parents here. And just even, anybody can see that something like this is horrible. He had head trauma, was just kind of left there. But after all of this police work, at least I think they're able to have the closure of that they're able to kind of identify who this child was and say his name and give him the proper, like, recognition in a sense, even though something horrible like this happened to him, unfortunately.
Yeah. And there's still questions. I hope one of these days we'll be able to figure out what happened to his brother, James.
Yeah.
And again, like you mentioned, like, this is just, like, I feel like most parents hear this and they just, like, can't even fathom something like this.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's so sad. I mean, like you mentioned, Jenny, like, I have a little niece, and she is the cutest thing I've ever seen, and I just can't imagine any harm coming to her, anyone wanting to hurt her. So
it's definitely really disturbing, but I think it kind of goes back to the importance of the work that these investigators do and the way that they work on these cases even after all these years have passed, not giving up on finding at least some sort of conclusion or resolution. Because I do think it's important that they're able to kind of identify who this child was, so that way, they're not forgotten in a way. Like they can still live on in that way, that, the community now knows who this innocent child was.
Right. And honestly, I just want to go back to the fact that his name given by the community is Charles Lee Charlotte.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that name is really important here, because it's not the name that his mother gave him. It's the name that people in the community who cared about this child
rallied
around and gave him this name. So his name is obviously Carl Bryant, but I want to reiterate the Charles Lee Charlotte, just because of the fact that the community sort of gave him that life.
I do think that that's a really important point that you touched on, and it goes back to how much the community cared for him, even though maybe they didn't know him, to be able to give him a proper burial as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's all we have for this episode. I know it's a lot. I feel like we cover serious topics with this episode, with these shows every single time. So, but if you want to keep hearing more about stuff like this, more news, more following along with these cases, please continue to tune in on air, online, on our website, dcnewsnow.com, and we'll see you next week.